reading, and then they assume people will understand that reading also means writing. So what is the current flavor, and how is VR, AR impacting these 21st century skills is what we are going to discuss today. We've got a very interesting panel. Not only geographically they are located at different places, but even in terms of experience, they've got a very rich and a wide varied experience. First of all, let me introduce Dr. Paul Unsworth, who is, please, Paul, can you raise your hand, please? So Paul is a lecturer at University of South Australia. He does a lot of work, research projects using immersive technology in STEM, but he's also got a lot of other interests in terms of Aboriginal art. He's also got a startup in regard to renewable energy, and God knows how many other things, So I always sometimes wonder, where does he get the time to spend on so many multiple kind of activities? Great, absolutely great, Paul. Next to Paul is Chris. Chris is based in Sunshine Coast. For those of you who are not from Australia, let me tell you, at one point of time, it was the most expensive real estate. I don't know what the current situation is. It is maybe about a couple of hours drive from Brisbane in Queensland. Now, Chris has been awarded one of the best teachers award in 2019. I don't know whether I've got the year right or wrong, but I will clarify with him. He's also, very good in getting a collaboration through with University of Sunshine Coast in regard to STEM projects. Chris, can you raise your hand, please?
G'day, everyone.
Next to Chris is a lovely lady called Karina. And Karina is based in Perth. Perth is the capital of Western Australia, which is also known as a mining town. But let me assure you, Karina has got all the good flavors of arts and STEM, etc., and quite far away from the Rust Belt, as we may call it. Karina is a science educator who's doing some wonderful work in terms of various stakeholders. So, Karina, can you please raise your hand? Next to Karina, we've got Nick. Nick is based in Melbourne or Adelaide. I am not sure at the moment, or maybe he's somewhere in between the two, because he's supposed to be teaching at a school in Melbourne, but he's doing his PhD in Adelaide. And he's a great STEM person, but also that he's had quite good geographical experience. A Canadian, and I don't know which part of Canada is he, whether he's from Vancouver, whether he's from Toronto side, but basically a Canadian who has been living in New Zealand, then went off to Brazil, and now in Australia, and also in Australia, like I said, in between, Melbourne and Adelaide somewhere. So raise your hand, please, Nick. And last but not the least, we've got Sagar, who's based in Mumbai, and he's very heavily involved in STEM over there. He's got his own community in regard to STEM also. But apart from STEM, he's also quite involved into corporate training. And how does he translate those STEM principles into corporate is another question that I have on my mind to ask him at some point in time. But having said that, welcome all of you. And let me kickstart the discussion by asking Paul the fundamental question that I raised first. Paul, is it STEM, STEAM, or STREAM? What is the flavor of the month?
Right. Thanks very much, Pradeep. Yeah, easy question. So let's have a bit of a think about, STEM and STEAM and STREAM. And there's another one that's popped up into view called STEMX. And essentially, you can see there's some growth happening here. There's sort of this, adding the arts, we're adding this kind of critical literacy and reading, and we can include HASS. In fact, we're adding on a lot of the key learning areas in the curriculum, but STEMX is the new one, I guess, and it forms a little bit under the work that we've been doing recently with culturally responsive pedagogy. So it's looking at all the extra assets of knowledge that we can pack into a kind of a learning design that speaks to STEM. And essentially, there are lots of characteristics and traits about STEM, but I guess we can agree on some things that STEM really offers, which is the design thinking, the computational thinking, the idea of inquiry and research, measurement, metrics, data. We're forming these ideas of projects when we actually embrace this idea of STEM, I think. And essentially, in schools, it's being translated into project-based learning or some kind of challenge, or maybe there's a champion teacher in science that wants to champion something. And we see these kinds of concentrations. And where immersive technologies fit into this is really interesting, because it sits outside, I guess, what we might say is curriculum, but it's an organizer of what can happen. And, the question that you asked is, what's the COVID flavor? I guess it depends on, the user experience, the type of product, the age and stage of the students that we're looking in schools, teachers' capabilities, the way that schools are set up in terms of structures and teaching spaces. There's a lot of variables here about how you might actually see one of these clusters being organised. And then you've got primary or secondary or higher education to factor into this. And I guess essentially in the COVID situation, when post-COVID, I guess there's been a sense of, do we fall back to these sort of products or programs that are instructional design? And there you might have the gallery objects that are immersive, where students can have a look at a solar system and they can plot their way through it. Where we're sort of looking at is the creator side of immersive technologies, which means that students can actually, create, design, do an inquiry, formulate a project, and these sorts of things. And so that's a different kind of design piece. And post-COVID, what I think is going to happen, in the same way that we have XMOOCs and CMOOCs, is that we're going to have more collaboration and more creativity available for students and teachers to build products that are more creative. So, I don't think there's any necessary, one better than the other in terms of the STEM clusters. It's really about fit purpose.
Thank you. I think you've put upon the point very well. In other words, what you said is that, look, what we are doing is that it's a question of how do we train our thinking process, how do we club out anything else, which can be added on to, what we call as 21st century skills. So love it. Thank you very much. And now over to Chris. Chris, I've had a panel on education also. And we had the session just a couple of hours back. And one of the things which emerged from the panel was that, yes, if immersive technologies were aligned more to the curriculum, then there would be much higher take-up. So my question to you is that, what is the current state of play? Are they just available as a resource, or are they aligned to the curriculum? What are you finding? And it is not just that what you are doing, but what are you coming across generally?
Thank you, Pradeep. Firstly, Paul, you're speaking my language. I think you pretty much nailed STEM in 3 minutes. So yeah, it really depends on your school environment, and we see very different approaches across the Sunshine Coast, and I know that happens everywhere. The way we take it, we're trying to be quite progressive, and as Paul said, we want to shift away from resource use. That whole idea of the barbecue sizzle, I like to call it, that short spurt of engagement using VR and AR, and then we move back to that standard teaching model. So at Mountain Creek on the Sunshine Coast, what we've initiated in the last 2 years is a course for our digital technology students, where they progress in Year 9 and Year 10 down an AR, VR, and also AI design course. So they're about being creative, using that design thinking process in the context of immersive technologies. So, really trying to shift about this whole idea of trying to solve real world problems. We try to link to UN sustainability goals. So teaching students to empathize with the world and to design with purpose. And that's really important. And so what we're seeing is our junior students are lapping this stuff up. It's amazing what they can do at a Year 9 level these days. So
one question which comes to my mind is,
yep.
Is the real estate in Sunshine Coast really that expensive even now?
I managed to buy there, and I'm a teacher, so it's not as bad as what you think. It's certainly not Sydney real estate. And it might get cheaper over the next 6 months. We'll see how we go.
Lovely, lovely. The key takeaways that I noted from Paul and from you were, really it's a question of getting the mind to think in a particular direction, and also how we can utilize those skills for solving real world problems. I think that is end of the day, and aligning it with sustainability and those kind of issues. Love it. Let's go across to Karina. Karina, when it comes to the education environment, we've got many different stakeholders. We've got the students, we've got the parents, we've got teachers, we've got the Department of Education, we've got the community, and XYZ. Now, everybody, I'm sure, like any other different set of stakeholders, would have different perceptions about what they think about STEM or the role of STEM in education. What is it that you find, and how best do you manage such diverse group of stakeholders?
Thanks, Pradeep. And yeah, likewise, Chris, Paul, you're both speaking my language. So many buzz terms in there and things that I can totally get on board with. I think in this case, it's about making sure that those stakeholders are heard, making sure that the stakeholders are a part of the conversations about these new and engaging solutions for STEM and STEAM and STREAM, all the acronyms. There's incredible examples out there all around the world. They've been coming out over the last few years. But really, it's about how we use STEM to, well, I don't want to discredit the software companies and the developers and the stuff that's already come out. But I'm still stepping into classrooms and I'm speaking to teachers and schools, and I'm hearing the lack of confidence about the know-how in trying to adopt these practically into the classroom, and those concerns about the costs for schools that maybe don't have the means to adopt it, or questions about which device to invest in. How do we get quality, well-rounded, curriculum-aligned resources that achieve what we want them to achieve? Technical issues that are going to occur mid-lesson with a student, and I can empathise with that educator's nerves in having to try and deal with that in front of 25 other students who are also having their technical issues. But that isn't to say that there isn't also this resounding excitement and interest, enthusiasm out there from educators and schools and the community about immersive tech and its potential. Like, they want it in their schools. We want to see it out in the community. There's no question about that. So I think it's about in managing the expectations and moving this space of immersive tech for STEM and STEAM and STREAM and other applications forward in the most impactful way that we can. It's about ensuring that those stakeholders, every one of them are a part of this conversation, and that they're informing the solutions. So the tech providers, the content creators, yes, but also the educators, the students themselves, the communities out there who are craving STEM and STEAM and STREAM knowledge, the academics and the research institutions who have stories to tell or information to give, the education departments who have curriculum priorities and agendas around STEM literacy. Let's connect all of those together so that we can come up with these sort of well-rounded products and valuable solutions for this immersive technology that is actually going to have practical applications.
So what you are saying in summary is that we got to engage and we got to involve the stakeholders, as we move forward, like for anything else. Great. Love it. Nick, tell me, mate, how is STEM in Brazil different to STEM in Canada, is different to STEM in New Zealand, is different to STEM in Australia?
Great question, Pradeep, and thank you for that. Before I start, I'd like to do a quick acknowledgement of country to Wurundjeri. So they're the original inhabitants of Melbourne, where I'm located, and they played a unique role in the creation of Melbourne, past, present, and future. When it comes to that question, I'd like to build off what Paul said. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of Paul. He's been supervisor. And so I think when you're looking at STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math, regardless of the acronyms that you add or you support or you withdraw, is this idea of this integration of these fundamental core disciplines. And I think within there, they're very similar across all the world. But what we're looking at is the localization of the different peoples within the community, as Paul mentioned, be they immigrants or the First Nations of these communities, and looking at real world problems, which Chris said as well. And so how do you look at these real world problems from different perspectives? And as Katrina said, you obviously need to have everyone involved and equal and playing a valuable role within there. And I think across the world, that's what STEM is becoming, is more than just a course or a class. It's a mindset. And it is, how do we improve the world? And what I would add, from everywhere that I've been in the world, is this mindset or this belief that we're making the world a better place. Let's just hope for a better future. And I think when you're looking at STEM, it's the core components that allow you to be able to create that future. And as Chris mentioned, I believe Paul did as well, is design thinking is a fundamental feature of that. So when we follow whatever design thinking model there is, at the very beginning, I taught quite young students, 7, 8, 9 in New Zealand, Māori students and Pacifica students, is how do you see the world when we start this process? And for them, it was, they look at the environment as part of themselves, so they don't see a separation. So if you're looking at the environment as a fundamental core principle, before you even start to look at a solution, you should say, is this going to make my community better? Is it going to enhance my actual physical environment? And is it going to leave a legacy for my people for the future, regardless if they're
Let me ask you a question. Are you in Melbourne at the moment? Are you in Adelaide or somewhere in between?
So I'm living in Melbourne, and then I'm doing school at the University of South Australia. Paul's obviously my supervisor in Adelaide. So it's all distance learning. It's a professional doctorate. So it's a series of 3 different projects.
Fabulous. And what I really liked was you picked away the key elements from Paul, Chris, and Karina. You mentioned about, engagement and involvement. You mentioned about solving real world problems. And you also mentioned about why it is more about getting a certain, way of thinking, So love that. Now, moving across to Sagar. Sagar, when I was in India, which is more than 30 years back now, you see, the common pattern used to be for parents to kind of tell the kids, look, you either try and become an engineer, you try and become a doctor, and that's end of the story, I mean, stuff like STEM, etc., kind of just not heard, So what is the situation nowadays, So are you finding that people have a choice in terms of what they want to do, and, are these flavors being discussed? Tell us.
Great. Thanks, Pradeep, for the amazing, thought-provoking question that you put forward across us. I can see that 30 years, if you are connecting back in the Indian education per se, definitely the child used to obey what the parents used to guide them. So if the parent says that you have to go and become an engineer, they actually go forward and take up the engineering course and become an engineer. But now, currently, we are entering into a 21st century where children actually have a say, and the parents discuss with the children that what is your passion. In fact, nowadays have seen in last 4-5 years that parents have been discussing with their children to discover their passions and convert it into profit, which is like which is like finding your own ikigai using the latest 21st century skills. But nevertheless, I mean, you have rightly said that with the involvement and the upgradation in the technologies like 5G, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, blockchain, all these things in the form of MOOCs, I mean, the massive open source courses which are readily available through the medium of e-learning, the children have a choice of course that they are engaged with. I'll give you just one example. Amidst this COVID situation as well, I am really happy that the STEM and the STEAM curriculum which we inflow in a lot of schools, we give the children a collaborative environment. In these days, the children are not able to come in a particular lab situation, but they have created 2 use cases sitting at their own specific homes and connecting through e-learning tools and virtual classrooms along with the mentors like us. So one project which is developed by a group of 4 kids, they are in grade 6, and they identified that the sanitizers which we use to wash our hands are also being touched a lot of times by multiple people, which can actually be a real world problem in fact passing on the viruses to each other. So they use the theory which we taught in the Arduino programming session. So they actually applied using sensors, coding, Arduino board and created a hands-free sanitizer. So the sensor senses your hand and automatically the sanitizer is being pushed in. And this is how creatively they have come up with the hands-free sanitizer, which can also be commercialized into a product nowadays. The second use case is the face shield. The kids are using 3D technology and printing the face shield, which is also a use case and really much needed. In fact, in Mumbai, with the help of the parents, we actually went across and gave away 10,000 face shields, which were 3D printed in our facility, and we gave it off free of cost to the corona warriors, like the police people, the doctors, the nurses, who are actually working really hard to help us out and get us out through such crisis. So I'm sure that such use cases,
Very good to hear that, you know.
And parents are also supporting the children in their passion. So that's really nice to look at it.
Good. So now coming back to Paul. Paul, what is it that you're seeing? You know, we anyway have a challenge in taxonomy. We've got, you know, VR, AR, MR, extended reality, and I don't know how many different types of realities which are floating around. But in short, when we look at VR and AR, what is having a higher take up in STEM? We are unable to hear you, Paul. Either you're on mute or...
No, it's okay. I'm glad I'm muted. No, here we go. Look, from my limited perspective, if I could plug in to see what's happening everywhere, I'd be probably well qualified to give an answer here. But what I am seeing within my patch and within my view, I'm seeing more of a take up in VR, mainly because it's speaking to the wearables and other sensory applications that make that immersive, and fundamentally we can have that in classrooms and provide those experiences. I'm talking mainly here about education and schooling. AR, at the same time, AR is absolutely complementary and has different sort of uses. It's far more portable. It's got a different level of experiences. But with, you know, advanced such as tilt brush and so all sorts of receptors that are sensory and all sorts of oral kinds of configurations, and the fact now that VR is offering collaborative spaces and creator sort of tools, I see that's where the take-up's going, and it may be a price point kind of difference. It may also be something that's relative to just being a little bit more across teachers and classes and that kind of thing. And then that's what the sectors here have been asking for. You know, it may be different somewhere else where AR is being given probably more promotional power and more take up for specific uses. So it's a difficult question to answer. Whether, you know, is one better than the other? Probably no. Or are, you know, the other mixed reality kind of versions that are out there okay? Many of the companies are sort of struggling with what they're trying to actually sort of cover in the market. And at the moment, I'm seeing more in the VR space as well. But I think, look, as things develop and with companies using, you know, sort of cool sort of surfaces technology that can pick up all sorts of GRS type signals, and you can create, you know, these sort of vector objects easily, and there's a whole way that you can create with these sort of tools. Look, you know, they're all going to come into their own worlds.
I agree with you, because what you are saying kind of, you know, it agrees with the overall holistic approach, where we are finding that VR is the more mature technology, but AR is coming up very strongly. And in the years ahead, it's anyone's guess as to which is going to be more dominant. No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And now we're going to ask Chris. Chris, you see, I see that there are a whole lot of sections within the higher education system who are focused on to capability building in the school environment, especially in the areas of STEM. And Paul is a classic example of that. But you have some unique kind of a collaboration which with University of Sunshine Coast. Could you tell us more about what is that collaboration about?
Yeah, certainly. So a little bit of context, Pradeep. So I'm from the Sunshine Coast, and it's a developing region. There's about 300,000 people, and we find at our school a lot of our higher achieving students tend to leave the region, you know, and our intellectual capital is just being diminished. Go to those, you know, big universities in the cities. And so about 4 years ago, I approached the University of the Sunshine Coast with the mandate to try to build that culture and protect those kids and stop that brain drain. Our university is extremely lucky. It's got a resource called the Cave 2, which is a visualization studio. Last count, there was about 4 or 5 in the world. And so I wanted to develop a chemistry-based resource to visualize complex molecules and reactions and give them access and see what the university can do with their education. So we've been developing it as a part of a partnership called Keeping It Local. And it's been really exciting to track the journey because when I first started in 2016, the Rift had only just come out. And now in 2020, as a result of some prize money that I've just been awarded, we are in the depths of developing an HMD version for the Oculus to really get that resource from the cave and bring it into the classroom as well as the homes of students. And as a part of that, there's a research project that's tacked onto my master's. But we want to develop the pedagogy that goes with it. I don't want this to be an engagement tool. It has to be more than that. I like to think about the resource that I've built as, if I get all the viewers out there to picture an apple right now, everyone's going to picture a different apple. And that happens in chemistry. When I draw up a molecule on the board, everyone might picture a different geometric version of that molecule. And so with the chemistry resource, everyone gets to see the same apple. And
so
that's the ultimate goal.
Can I become your student? See,
certainly. You want to come back to
I see the dollars. I hear about the grants that you're getting, and grants is such a difficult situation to get, or the money or the prize money that you're getting. So I'm getting, tempted, that I just follow the dollars. But anyway, thank you very much. Love that. Now coming to Karina. Karina, as a science communicator, you have the challenging job of trying to communicate complex concepts into simple terms with a whole lot of different stakeholders. And what I really want to understand from you is what opportunities and challenges do you have in your role?
Yeah, it's a great question because it actually gets to the crux of exactly why I'm here. My challenge specifically in my current role is communicating the often complex cellular and molecular science of the inside of cells and showcasing academic research, not just to students, but to the community, to stakeholders, to policymakers, and to do that in an understandable and engaging, a tangible way. And yes, it can be challenging. So cue immersive technologies, virtual reality specifically in my case, which stepped up and a few years ago offered me an opportunity, a solution, I guess, to some of those challenges that I was facing. What better way to engage a learner in what happens inside of a cell than chucking them into the middle of one, to observe it, but even better to interact with it, to find out what happens when you tinker with its biology. Or like, how do I explain to a learner or a science interested member of the public how salt that gets into a crop plant that's growing on really saline agricultural soils actually gets partitioned away into the vacuole inside of the cell to protect it? Well, what if I stick that learner into a virtual cell and have them throw salt at a vacuole to help them understand that concept? But it goes further than that, and it touches on the same things that we keep coming back to, that idea of real world applications. So rather than just teaching curriculum level STEM, we've reached a point, I think, across the education sector, at least here in Australia, and I'm sure elsewhere in the world, where we realise that learners need to be connected to how STEM skills can actually be applied, how what they learn in the classroom could be used to address those global challenges, and connecting them to real world research and innovation, and hopefully local examples of that as well. And so for me, that's where VR really shone. It provided an excellent way of connecting my audiences, not just with what happens inside the cell, but the why and the how researchers are studying this and how it connects to solutions for agriculture and food security.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I think that was a good description of stakeholder management, as well as looking at how to communicate complex concepts into simple terms. Now going on to Nick. Nick, you have got industry quite involved in the STEM education. Now, I've always been a very strong proponent of industry academia collaboration. And it is easier said than done in the areas of vet as well as in higher education, because there the employment pathways are pretty clear, But even then, there's a way to go insofar what one would really call as the ideal collaboration. So I'm very interested to see that how you're getting this industry involved in K to 12 level, especially in STEM, etc. Over to you.
Yeah, great question. So I'll give three quick examples. I've been very fortunate to work quite a bit with industry, but I'll try and gear them towards VR and AR. So the first one was Auckland Uni approached me to ask if they could develop a virtual reality simulation of how to safely escape our school if there's been an earthquake. Earthquakes were a problem in New Zealand. And so I said I'd love to do that. Where I think I've been very fortunate is I have a huge amount of respect for my students and my colleagues, and I've been able to articulate the skills that we possess and the perspective that we possess as well. So I told the Auckland Uni I'd really like it if, instead of us just testing this out, if you actually did your work within our school, and then our students could see the setup. You had to set up the VR whole system so we could use it, and then we'll obviously trial it out. So there, we were able to give feedback and help the actual creation, but it was more from a teacher perspective and then the students being involved. So there's quite a tangible commercial benefit to having someone who understands students if you are targeting students. Now, in that same line, if you are going to target young adults with any ed tech, then having their perspective is probably very valuable. So we did a product with ANZ Bank along the same lines. They wanted us to create it with them, and we loved the opportunity. And that was from the previous projects where we said, hey, there's a real benefit to having us involved. Now, nowadays, I work with students, young students, and I would struggle to truly empathize with the environment that they live in, with all these, huge global changes and technology changes. So as someone who actually spends my day with young children, I can't connect with them. So if I really, really wanted to understand that from a product development angle, I would need to have them involved to really grasp that. And I think as we empathize, and as people were saying before, we're using design thinking to really create these solutions, then we can have the students involved. And so literally with ANZ, they were part of the design thinking process, which then allowed us to understand that and then to go on.
Thank you very much. Now, coming back to Sagar. Sagar, predominantly the view has been that in regard to between VR and AR, VR is more popular in the STEM area till now. Are you seeing the same trend in India?
Thanks, Pradeep. I would just give one common trend which I have been observing from all the talks across the globe that we are having here is VR and AR, the immersive technologies like this are giving all the teachers and the trainers or the facilitators a greater chance of teaching the higher order thinking skills, and which is very difficult to learn or to teach. And with the immersive technologies, this one thing has been very possible is that a teacher can virtually teach all the students across, irrespective of their time zones, locations, and age. So basically, it's education, equal education for all has been really possible. One major trend as compared to AR and VR is that the students have really high retention points. As per the research which I have read across and we have observed in the classroom also, the students are able to retain 90% of what they are actually realizing and feeling, and they are learning by doing a lot of activities. There is no more one size fits all curriculum age. I think it's more of the AR VR utilities are giving a lot of motivation to the students to participate in the classroom. At the same time, they are giving a lot of engagement and interaction. A lot of kids are able to comprehend and ask questions which are out of the textbooks. These are few very interesting trends that we are seeing and looking at. This helps us to increase possibilities of experimentation, like the virtual labs. I'm sure we all of here have been a part of an education system with more of talk and talk lectures or maybe max to max the audio visual rooms, which were very new in our education times. But now the kids are natural nomads, like digital nomads. They are very free to hands-on on mixed realities. They are always more distracted, is what the parents complain. But I feel that AR and VR will definitely give us a distraction-free environment when they are close into a bubble of focus and concentration. They learn more immediately.
So, Sagar, I agree with you that the kids are digital nomads, but what about the teachers? Are they also digital nomads? But we'll leave that for the next discussion at another point in time. And it was a wonderful discussion all I had with all of you. I enjoyed the discussion, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I think the key takeaway messages from the entire group sessions were, number one was that yes, we've got to be looking at get the higher order thinking, going. We're not to be looking at how to focus on real world problems. We need to be kind of engaging and communicating. We need to be, collaborating with industry. We need to be collaborating with academia. And end of the day, whether it is VR or AR, this is just a means, a technology for really kind of either getting higher learning outcomes or learning engagement. So with this, let's go across and get a few questions from the audience.